There we go. My only wish is that Zoom would let me make that not sound like that. I don't like the way that she sounds. There should be no reason that I can't make that be like Homer Simpson or
Yeah.
Darth Vader
Or a British accent or something.
or Samuel L. Jackson. Like just something. Like let me do something else with it. So all right. Here we go. All right. So Karl and Laura Forehand, welcome to the show. I think it took 2.5 years to plan this episode. And so let me apologize. I had a new job at work and it's made recording the podcast exceptionally difficult because I work, I don't know, 75, 80 hours a week now. And
We
so
just kept writing books. So since you wouldn't pay attention to us, we just kept writing.
I'm going to write until they let me go. Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. So it's been years since I
Yeah,
had you on, Karl. And I think, Laura, this is your first time being on, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
that's
I think
right.
Yeah.
so.
Well, welcome to the game. If
Thank
you
you.
were to like surmise who and what Laura and Karl, who and what Laura and Karl Forehand are, what is that?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of complicated at this point, but we were in ministry for 20 years. I was always kind of a technical person, a programmer and things like that, till I got in the ministry and was there for 20 years, and then kind of began to deconstruct my faith. Um, Fought through religion, and we've kind of stepped outside of religion now. Um, and that's kind of who we are. We're parents and grandparents now. And I think another real important feature is that I had a stroke in January. And so that's deeply impacted our lives,
Mm.
and other challenges. But
Mhm.
Laura can tell you who she is.
I feel like probably I'm like a lot of people that are going through deconstruction. And I mean, there's things that make us who we are that are unique, but definitely we have a lot of the same, challenges. I think that's important to say because when I first started my deconstruction journey, if you will, it's very lonely. I felt very isolated. And so I guess it feels good to me to let others know that there are lots of people out there that are deconstructing or reexamining their faith. So yeah, I think we have things that make us really unique, but also feel like we're very relatable as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Karl, how has that been? You don't have to go into detail. But how has that been recovery? Because I know it's a big deal. Um, having any kind of medical thing. But how has that been for both you, Karl, as well as you, Laura? Like it's a big deal. So how are y'all
Yeah,
with that?
it was interesting that I knew that my genes were working against me. So we became vegan and did a lot
Mm,
of things to try to combat that. I was fairly healthy and started working on an assembly line. And I don't know if I just had too much stress, too much in my life, but had the stroke. And I remember being in the emergency room looking at Laura and saying, for whatever reason, we had the resolve to say, we're going to do this. I mean, we don't have any other choice. We're going to do it. But at the same time, I looked at her and said, I'm just sad, um, because I didn't want this. I didn't choose it. And I certainly tried to avoid it. But it was a reality that we had to face. And then, even though I think we had done some growth through our deconstruction that prepared us for it, but there was more to come during the recovery
mm,
as it became challenging. And with the stroke, things change little by little, every month, not every day, and the progress is slow. It takes a long time, and you start from really not being able to do anything, and now I can do more, but I'm still quite limited.
yeah.
It's been I hate to just say it's been a growing process because I don't want to diminish, how hard Laura's worked to support me,
Mm,
and how hard I've worked at my recovery too. So
And I think when you have a stroke, you see the physical limitations, you see all the physical aspects of it, right? But you don't see the emotional and mental aspects of it. And I would say for me, that's been the hardest part because, when he gets frustrated, like you said, we did a lot of healing in our deconstruction, a lot of growth, I would say. But it's interesting how kind of those things that were an issue in deconstruction that you think you've worked through rear their ugly head, when you go through something like this. So for me, the emotional, the psychological, the mental aspect of this journey has been probably the hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah. So how has, and this isn't what the book is about. We'll get into the book eventually. So what would you say has been the impact so medical issues, regardless of, I think, the issue, are one of those things that really impact people's ability to see, hear, want to hear, listen for, ignore, whatever adjective or adverb, or I'm not the best at English, whatever word you want to put there. Uh, a relationship with God. And so you'll see, like, I know with what my wife does as well at work, like you'll see, families' faith change through medical adversity. And so as y'all have kind of navigated that and we're years out from writing this book, or not years out, but you've got this community. How has your faiths been impacted? Where kind of where you were at the beginning when you said, you were doing a lot of things, Karl, you work and you're doing this, Laura, you're doing all these other things, and you've had to like pare things down because you got to make room for things. How has your faiths changed? How is it different today than it was before the stroke?
I think, over the past 7 or 8 years, it's just kind of been constantly evolving. But what the stroke does, I think most of my rehab people and so on said I did excellent, that I was an overachiever, and I'm always kind of like that. But still, 11 and a half months later, I get up in the morning, get something quick to eat, and then I go to the gym, do like an hour workout, and then I come back home, and I have to go back in the middle of the day. I have to go back to sleep. I have to rest again just from doing that. So I'm saying that to say it's slowed me down. And, we can talk about quiet time, prayer life, meditation, things like that. But you really have to become comfortable with solitude and moving at a much slower pace, and realizing that's still okay. The frustration comes in the kitchen when you're trying to make lunch and nothing's working right, and you keep dropping things on the floor, and but also with you just can't move as fast. You can't get to where you want to go. You can't accomplish what, and that's when, I think that's when you find that deep, true spirituality, that we've kind of always been longing for, but we never could slow down enough to experience. And so, call that a quote unquote blessing or whatever, but it's definitely been fruitful for me. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does. Diving into the book a bit. So at the beginning of the book, I forget where, and I don't have page numbers because I read everything on the Kindle, and so it just says percentages. So it's like 30% in or something like that.
30%.
Whatever that is. You talk about, or one of you talks about. So are these words, are they just yours, Karl's, or is it a joint venue? Like, is it a joint effort where Laura, you're coming in and you're like, yeah, don't say that, say this instead. So where are we at, like, as it relates to authorship? Because I know how it is when I write things, and my wife will read it and be like, no, we're just going to Control A. You're going to hit the delete button. We're not going to say that. I like where you're going, but don't say that. You can't say that. So how much of these words are yours, Laura?
My part is definitely 100% my part. The only thing I would like caution Karl about is like if he were to mention one of our grandchildren, like I feel like we have to have some respect there. And, even though they're our grandkids, I think we need to definitely ask permission before we share their story. So, that would be the only thing I think I might have edited.
Yeah.
Although I speak a lot about our our grandchildren.
Yeah.
But that's after, making sure that was okay to share those aspects of their story.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
always
that's-
fun to ask because I know how much I get edited or filtered
Right.
on a daily basis. So y'all talk at the beginning about the need for church to be honest. And I forget the exact quote, but you're talking about, we really need to be honest about just the community. We need to the church has to be honest if there's ever going to be anything after it, to kind of summarize that. And it's in the very first chapter, I believe. If it's not in the first chapter, it's in the second chapter. What does the church need to be honest about?
Well, the first chapter is about evangelism, and I had a habit of walking, saying from the pulpit when I was a preacher, let's keep the main thing, and by that I meant evangelism. That was one of our 5 purposes of the church, and the problem is not with evangelism. The problem because go and make disciples. So making disciples is making learners. It's I know something, I want you to know it also, and I want you to benefit from it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that aspect of Christianity that says we found something that's helpful and we want you to know about it. The trouble, as I mentioned in the book, is what it becomes. And many times the church becomes like a multi-level marketing group, and everyone in the church is postured towards new members or potential members. They're postured towards the front door. The big church that we attended, the very last church we attended, it was real obvious because there was a front and back door, and you could see one from the other, kind of narrow in the middle, wide on the ends, and so there'd be a place for you to come in. But everyone in the church, the greeters, the pastor, the pastor's wife, the
Various
staff members were all postured towards those new members. And this 1,500 member church, the pastor visited our house, which is an hour away. He went to lunch with me twice while we were new members. But literally, the people come to the church wounded, and we say we want to help them, and we intend to help them, but they very well could be hobbling out the back door while we're postured towards those new members. So the trouble is the organization never has time to slow down and make an assessment of, are the lost sheep really here in the congregation, and we're not helping them. The organization can't slow down, and the organization always comes first, and it's got to keep moving. So I think that, that was one of the things that kind of stuck out to us. There's about 10 chapters in the beginning that address different issues like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Laura, for you, what do you feel like the church has to be honest about?
Yeah, that last part that Karl was talking about is definitely the thing that sticks out to me, that there is real hurt in the church. And I think it's just so easy as an organization to bypass it rather than address it. And, if you think about these huge churches, like the last one we attended, I mean, it's kind of like I say in my classroom, there's 24 of you and one of me, so I can't, there's got to be some, I have to push some of that responsibility onto them. But I also make sure that I know my students. So when there's some real trauma there, I can, spend some one-on-one time with them or get them to the counselor or whatever that may be. And I feel like that aspect may be lost in especially some of these really big churches, but even in the smaller churches that we pastored. I mean, it's kind of like people come in and they go through the motions of church and then they walk out, and we really don't have any idea of what they're truly going through.
Yeah. 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 You're going to say something?
We have this kind of, we've been in some contemplative groups and contemplative prayer and things like that. And I spent some time with some Benedictine sisters that helped me heal. And so we kind of had a desire to keep doing something after we kind of stepped out of the pulpit and so on. So we would try to lead these contemplative prayer groups or contemplative groups where you do meditation and share. And when people would share, the people that were Christians, and probably especially evangelical Christians, had a really tough time just listening to people. These sisters taught me was that deep evocative listening, and we just seem to have a problem, and I'm afflicted with it myself, and it took a long time to kind of program it out of me. But people share something deep and hurtful. They're in pain, and our immediate thing, because it makes us uncomfortable, is to try to fix that for them, or to try to excuse. We have these built-in excuses or some, and then because we just want to get on down the road, we want to finish the Bible study, or we want to finish the small group or whatever. But when I would have these sessions with these sisters, and I'm not Catholic at all, but these ladies helped me immensely. But they would say, Karl, what do you feel? Where are you feeling it? And I wasn't used to even talking about how I felt. But I would tell them how I felt, and they would say, where do you feel it? And then they would just go, so a part of you feels this. And then they would just be quiet. And then eventually I'd kind of connect dots and start to address what was really in there, what was really hurting. And sometimes they just kind of groan. They just kind of go, and it was foreign to me, but that's what brought deep healing. That was the deep shadow work that they taught me to do, that eventually I could do that on my own. And they called themselves companions, not healers.
Yeah.
So they just kind of walk with you and be present with you on that healing journey. And I think that's what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said the word contemplative prayer, which leads me to a question that I've been looking forward to asking you, Laura. So later on in the chapters in the book, it's like, I don't know, let me look at the thing. 62% in, 60, whatever chapter that is. You're going to find that I skip around all over the place.
That's okay.
I feel like it was, I don't know, first or second year of the podcast, I had asked Barbara Brown Taylor a question, and she's like, you seem to be unediting my book. She called me, it's a word that I can't remember, but she's like, you keep putting together sentences that were together, that the editor was like, I'm going to need you to rip that apart and break it into two different chapters if you could. She's like, you have a knack for putting things back together. Not that that's this, but what you said, Karl, leads perfectly into it. So I'm just going to read your words, Laura, to you, because that feels fun. It says, I remember when Karl asked me the question, what are your practices? And it was while we were doing a podcast together on the desert sanctuary. And I'll ad lib a bit here, but you basically said, I don't have any practices now that we don't go to church. But what Karl just described, those are practices. And so can you rip apart like religious practices, how that works for you while you're out in the desert, metaphorical desert? And I do want to rip apart that a bit as well, because the themes of caravans, oases, water, solitude, sand hitting my face because I grew up in the desert, like all of that matters to me religiously in a weird way. But I more so want to lean into practices right now, because Karl just described a practice, but what does that look like for you now?
Yeah, so probably when we wrote the book, or definitely when I first, stepped out of organized religion, I really felt like there were no practices, prayer, going to church, Bible studies, those were the practices, right? So I really felt like I didn't have any practices, but I definitely do have practices. Mine are just more like going inside, sitting in nature, just trying to, like right now we're kind of working on a project and just really trying to figure out where I stand on things. And that creates a lot of anxiety for me, but it's been good, because I don't think that even when we were writing this book, that I felt like writing the, Out Into the Desert book was very healing. It let me talk about things that I couldn't really talk about while we were inside the church. But now, I'm having to really go, okay, what do you believe? How do you see this? So a lot of that. And I know this sounds kind of strange maybe, but even just like spending time holding my grandson or playing with my granddaughters, things like that, those are very those give me so much joy. I really can't explain it. I mean, I tried to explain the whole when Holland was born in our book, but there is just some sort of really deep connection that I have. And so like anytime I can just spend time with the people that I love, have some really meaningful conversations. Now with my grandchildren, they're young enough, I can't really have those meaningful conversations, but just, just watching them play or seeing them use their imagination. But, Karl and I have been able to have some really rich conversations, especially lately with this new project. But yeah, I would say those are more my practices now, really just either being with myself and figuring out what I think, what I believe, or, really being present with other people. And that was something as a pastor's wife, I was there, but I wouldn't say that I was really present with them. And that kind of goes back to that whole listening, sitting there and really listening to people and not trying to fix them. Yeah, so I would say those are more my practices these days, but I feel like I'm always evolving, which is a word that you use. I mean, I feel like where I was 2 years ago when we read this, or excuse me, when we wrote this book, isn't where I am right now necessarily. I still agree with what we wrote, but I feel like I've grown since then. And I kind of see myself as always growing, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to juxtapose the how do I want to say this? What is the difference between wilderness and desert? Specifically as sanctuary, because I think for a lot of people, they hear desert and they think wilderness, like there's just nothing out there. For me, I hear wilderness and I think about the mountains. But why do y'all continue to circle back into the desert? Like everything, a lot of the work that you do has that at its theme. And so can you rip apart maybe the differences between, in your mind, what the desert is versus maybe what wilderness is and the purpose of that as we try to refine community?
Yeah, we hardly ever use the word wilderness, but I know a lot of
I
people
do though. I like it.
Yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
and if people like people that helps explain, that's good. But on in the podcast intro, we kind of explain that, and it's on the back of one of the books. And it talks about how when we began to question things, when we began to, we change our views a little bit, it seems like, or it feels like we're wandering out into the desert. So many people, though, talk about in the writing and so on, talk about how surprised they were by the life in the desert. And so many of the prophets, the desert mothers and fathers, so many of the prophets and poets went there. They went to a place that helped them be still, but in the end, they found life there. And the goal is not to make an idol out of the desert. It's just a metaphor, because so much of the journey of deconstruction feels like that. When you begin to say, well, it looks like I'm going to have to stop being a pastor, or it looks like the best thing for us right now is to step away from organized religion because we're getting in fights every time we go home. When you take that step, like we talk about in deconstruction, you're like, well, wait a minute, now who am I? What do I believe? Where am I going? And all those questions, it just feels that way. It's overwhelming. There's a PTSD kind of element to it of I've been hurt by people, and how do I fix this? And so we just use it a lot because people feel that way so often during different stages of deconstruction, evolution, growing, healing, all the, the different things you go through, that so often you'll feel that sense of, wait a minute, what if nothing's here? What if this is wilderness? What if it's nothingness? A lot of philosophers worry about nihilism, kind of that I don't believe anything, I don't think any, I don't care type of thing, and we worry about things like that, and immediately we worry about going to hell or dropping off into the abyss.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of a natural part of that fear that has so often for people turned into a beautiful thing when you're there. Does that make sense at all?
It does. Yeah, it does. For you, Laura, what does the desert like kind of symbolize?
Yeah. So definitely when I walked away from organized religion, I spoke of this earlier. I felt very, very alone, very isolated. Like I really did picture kind of like this barren desert wasteland. There was like nothing and nobody. It just felt very alone, which is kind of funny in a way because I felt that way a lot in ministry, right? As a pastor's wife, I felt that way a lot. But at least there were other people around me, right? And when I went to church, but when I, stepped away, I didn't feel that. I think the thing for me about the desert, like when I think about the wilderness, and I may have this totally wrong, but when I think about the wilderness, I do think about like there being at least plant life around right there. I feel like I'm picturing right now, hiking in Colorado where there's lots of trees and things like that. There's not a lot of people around, but there still is a lot of life around me. But in the desert, to find that, I had to be really intentional, right? You're just not going to, if you think about a vast desert, you have to be really intentional to find that cactus flower or, some type of life that crosses your path. And so I feel like for me that the desert has made me much more intentional, because it is kind of hard to find. At first it was anyway. Now that we've been, quote unquote, out here in the desert for some time, we are finding that there is beautiful life out here, in other people. And, and they are able to give us life, and we're able hopefully to give them some life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. See, for me, the desert, not that it's a good or bad metaphor, but the desert to me, growing up where I grew up. So I don't know if y'all know where I grew up or not, but I grew up in the middle of Western Texas, like almost below New Mexico, where I think we average 6.5 inches of rain a year. And so it is
Wow.
legitimately a desert. And I mean that as in that 6.5 inches, that's on 4 different days and it is coming down. Like we are flash flooding.
Yeah.
It's like I can remember going to college and I left my truck at home. And if it wasn't rotated, just the sand in the air that you can't see, you can't really feel, it would get rid of the clear coat partially on one side. So you could see when the light would hit it, it would be dull on one side. So you had to
Wow.
intentionally rotate your cars, or it would dull. If it just sat there, it would just dull. Now, if you're driving it around, obviously you don't have to do that because you're constantly hitting it in different ways. But there is beauty in life in the desert. But I think that your words, Laura, about you had to be really intentional. I like that a lot. I always prefer the wilderness, though. I think to your point of there are things out here and I can sit on a tree stump and this is cool, or sit in some shade and whatnot. As you've been, you said the word nihilism, Karl, which makes me think of one of my favorite Twitter accounts, which for this year still exists. We'll see if Twitter's a thing next year. Have you ever followed this? Has nothing to do with your book, but that word always makes me smile. And it shouldn't, because nihilism is not a good thing, or possibly not a good thing. Have you heard of the account Nihilist Arby's?
No.
So I'll read you a few of them. They make me laugh. So here we go. This Thanksgiving, it's time to pretend that being trapped in this nightmare prison of sentience, toil, pain, and fear is something to celebrate. Be thankful that this life is short and that eternal black nothingness comes soon for us all. For until then, we are but slaves. Eat at Arby's. Everything it's always enjoy Arby's. Eat at Arby's. Everything is always, it's just, um, you know, I don't know. It is one of those days. They don't tweet often, but when it's like once a month. But when they do, you're like, that's funny. Like I don't know why that's funny. It shouldn't be funny. I think the part that makes it funny is so eat at Arby's. Just
Yeah.
this podcast brought to you by Arby's. Why not?
Right.
So I know that you've created some small groups of community, and so I do want to kind of delve into what the church looks like going forward as it relates to community, because I don't think the church is going to look the same that it does today. In let's say 50 years, it'll be faster than that, but I would rather just not guess. So let's just say by the time I'm dead, it won't look the same. There we go. 50 years. That story feels like it checks out. And so you created a bunch of communities, and there's some small communities around this podcast as well, of a tight-knit group of people that have a safe place to come and say what needs to be said, get it off their chest, or just a place for people to listen to them and they don't get judged, because when people judge them, I kick them out of the community. I've intentionally kind of gated it that way, because I want it to be a safe place. And so kind of my question is, what is the purpose of community? And then I'm curious, as you've delved into talking with so many people, intentionally creating a space for people to be heard, how have communities of a faith that is not what we came from, how have they contributed or found a home in some of the desert sanctuaries that you've helped foster? Just thinking about people from other faiths, if that has happened or not.
Yeah. So community is probably the one thing that people go back to. And if I could just back up a little bit and say this, that, when people say, well, you're not a part of organized religion now, so where do you get community? And I say, I get community everywhere. And that I have a family, we have families, we have workplaces, we have people online. The podcast interviews we do, I don't know if you found this over the years, when you interview somebody for a podcast and listen to them for 45 minutes to an hour, you become very close. It's an intimacy there.
Mm-hmm.
And
if you're doing it right, if you're paying attention.
Yeah. So there's a group of those types of people and so on, but people assume that organized religion is community, and I just want to suggest that, or ask people to evaluate that closely. Or is it really community? We talk about it like it's a family, but sometimes, not always, sometimes it's a common enemy intimacy where we all hate the same people, or even if it's the devil, we're all against the same thing. But also sometimes there's not real intimacy, because we come and listen to a lecture, we watch a mini concert, we go home. We might have a small group, so on, but do we really get that intimacy where, like I was talking about before, where we can heal? So I have some community with those Benedictine sisters still. I talked to Sister Marcia the other day. She got attacked by a dog, and so we were talking about that and talking about having her on the podcast. To me, that is that's where I find my. You realize two things. Number one, that spirituality kind of becomes real simple, but often a lot deeper. But also that community is not in one place. It doesn't happen at a certain time of week, and it doesn't. Jesus kind of alluded to that we wouldn't go to a place. So it's not in one place. It's not at a specific time, and it's not with just one group of people that's, oddly enough, really like us. So my pet peeve in that area is trunk or treat, and I don't know if you do that or not, but trunk or treat takes.
We do. We participated a few weeks ago. 100%.
Yeah.
Out of laziness. It's just so freaking convenient. I can show up. We're done in 40 minutes. I can go home.
Right. Here's the deal with trunk or treat. Trunk or treat we're really introverted. So in the community we live in, we're we don't talk to our neighbors more than we have to. But
More than we
Treat-
have
It's
to.
true.
What's
It's
the
true.
acceptable, not to cut you off, what's the acceptable amount of talking to the neighbors? Like what,
Oh boy.
oh man,
like
I don't
in a
know that we
month,
have any.
an
we
hour
shouldn't
total in the month?
we shouldn't answer that question because we're both introverted. We like people
Happy
who
living on the hill.
just don't like being around them all the time.
Anyway, let me get you back. Let me get you back to trunk or treat. It just makes me
So
laugh.
trunk or treat takes you out of your out of your real community, and takes you to your faux community where everybody's really a lot like you. You've kind of chosen that. We all believe the same. We end up kind of looking the same. We're the same. There's not a lot of diversity in our worship services and so on. So instead of building community in your community, it's trying to manufacture that. And I understand that's good intentions behind it, right? We want to provide a place and a safe place and things like that. And that's one thing we have to kind of watch in our Facebook communities and things like you mentioned before, is that we're just not trying to manufacture something. That community is usually pretty organic if we are just open and look for openings, look for opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is Laura and Karl are against candy.
No,
Not
you read
at
that
all.
completely wrong.
Yeah, we're not at all against candy.
Though you didn't intend this, and I don't think that you've written this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I do find it fun, though, that at trunk or treat, a lot of people come up to church and they're wearing masks. It's just one time out of the year we get rewarded with candy. And so that feels fun. Yeah, right. I get to wear my mask and get rewarded with candy. So
Yeah,
that is the we'll call that my passive aggressive church dig for the. And I'm aware that a lot of people in my church will listen to this and don't hear me saying I don't appreciate what they're doing. I genuinely do appreciate being able to go to one place, get all the candy, and go home. That is, it could equally be the YMCA or the Kiwanis. I don't really care, because our daycare will do one too. I'll go to that one too. We'll hit 20 trunks,
yeah,
get more than enough candy. Let's rock and roll, and let's go home. Because I'm not an introvert, but I don't like to go places and meander unless it's a place like hiking or the wilderness or something where that's the intent, is to go out and get lost. But like
right.
when I'm in places, like I hate shopping. I don't want to go in there. I don't want to look down aisle 6. I just want the stuff to be where I need it to be, and I want to go home. I don't want to be bothered,
Yeah.
which probably says a lot more about me. But I'm going to make that. I'm going to make a trunk or treat shirt that says we wear masks every year, every day. 52 weeks out of the year we wear masks. 1 week you get candy. Show up for trunk or treat. Yeah.
I would buy that t-shirt.
It's too many words, but
Is your summary there that trunk or treat, kind of plays on our consumerism, and
it all does,
most
though.
efficient way of getting candy. So
Yeah. I wonder what trunk or treat looks like at like Joel Osteen's church. That could be fun trunk or treat to go to. Speaking about consumerism. Anyway, so I want to talk about a concept, not a concept. I want to talk about a topic that I just don't really like talking about, but I'm going to because it makes me feel uncomfortable. And that's probably a good place to be. So there is a section in here where y'all are talking about sex, purity culture, etc. And then Laura, I'm gonna come to you on this because I like what you have to say. I read what Karl said before you, but then you say, I definitely want to let Karl off the hook in this chapter. The whole concept of giving a purity ring to our daughters came from me.
Mhm.
It's true. And then you go on about that. So can you kind of rip apart that chapter a bit and say whatever you want to it? Because and I'll be honest, I had 2 small girls, and so I still struggle with that concept, because part of me is like, I'm gonna let them do what they're gonna do. They're gonna be adults. They need to be safe about it. But also, stop. It's my kid. Like you know what I mean? So there's a juxtaposition there that I'm still not comfortable with, and I don't have to be comfortable with yet because they're 7 and 10, but I'm gonna have to get comfortable real quick. And so I'm just curious your thoughts, your insight, and more so I'd like to learn from your wisdom of that, because you've done this before, and why I'd be a fool to not ask.
Well, I think everything about the purity culture for me and those purity rings was focused on fear. Okay. So it was all about, it was very fear driven. Looking back now, I'm like, that's a purity ring on their finger is not going to keep them from, doing, I mean,
Whatever
what
it is they want to do.
really. But it gave me some sort of weird sense of peace. But I think when we do things like that, we let fear drive our parenting, then we miss real opportunities to sit down and discuss those types of things that are really hard, right? I mean, I don't remember my parents ever discussing sex with me. I mean, I just somehow knew that sex outside of marriage was wrong, and it was like a straight path to hell, and all that. But we and that's kind of how we almost raised our kids. It's funny that you mentioned that, because like things will pop up in my head and I'll like text my daughter and I'll just be like, wow, I'm really like, I just have to say I'm sorry that, that's how I parented. And she's always very gracious, but she did share with me that, she and her husband, they've had to do a lot of work around sex in their marriage because of the message, right, that we sent. And I love the way that they're now, raising their children to just not see like their body as shameful, and not see who they are as something you have to hide. The other side of that is they're not like, go parade yourself however you want kind of thing. But, just having those conversations with them. And I feel like we really miss that opportunity because of the fear that was wrapped up in purity culture. And we somehow thought that if, or I thought, because I truly was the one who was like, we need to give our girl, and the funny thing is, like, we were all about giving our girls a ring, but did we ever talk to our son about any of that? No, like we literally like went with the whole narrative, like it was their responsibility to make sure, that the boys around them weren't tempted. And then we did nothing, or I don't know if you did, Karl, but we did nothing to educate our son. I mean, I had conversations with him in the car, where he was like, can you please just let me out, Mom? Like, can we not talk about this, But it was more about, just treating a girl with respect and, but yeah, it was so fear driven with me. And I think if we could, and Karl might mention this later, but he talks about how, rather than, just, hitting our kids with these things that are traumatizing, fear ridden, how about if we just have conversations? Let's communicate. Let's talk about, like, sexual desire is normal. Like, it's normal. Like, our kids should, that they're gonna feel that. So let's open up some conversation. I don't think that means that you sit there and you go, yeah, do whatever you want, be irresponsible. I mean, but we can't have those conversations about how to be responsible if we're not even going to bring it up. And we're just going to like go, okay, this purity ring right here, that's going to keep you safe. Like, no,
just don't do it.
Just don't do it. It's kind of like the whole, drug back in the, I don't even know, I'm so old, but
DARE, I know DARE. I know DARE.
Just
drug assistance, drug abuse resistance education. That's what it stands for.
Yeah. But just to tell our kids to just say no, because then I feel like when those hormones do kick in and they're having all these feelings, or, some kids are just more curious than others. If we're not having these conversations with them and trying to help them navigate through that, I think, and I'm grateful that our children are all very, gracious to me when I say, man, I really messed up here. But I also do struggle with feeling like I miss so many opportunities to just have some really good conversations with them.
Yeah.
The chapter's called How Religion Ruins Sex, which is probably just a little provocative of a title, but I would say that we didn't know how to do it because we had dysfunction when we came into the marriage. Purity culture twisted that up even more. You think about purity culture was basically run by a young adult guy named Josh, whatever.
Harris. Yeah.
It was a misguided mission, like Laura said, based on fear, and it just caused all kinds of havoc. We've been interviewing women for 3 months, and all of them talk about that. All of them mention that in some way or another, that it just jacked them up. And so Laura and I still, at 50 something, still have to deal with elements of that personally in our life, not just in our kids. And like she said, they survived pretty well. They got some good information somewhere, and then we've worked with them since then too. But we still have issues, and
Yeah. Well, because the church culture laced with purity culture, however you want to look at that, that we were a part of was just all about, the woman is subject to the man, and basically, without being too graphic, whenever he wants it, as the wife, you don't say no, so basically it's really easy,
even
I
if
could
I
go
didn't
in
demand that, even
right,
if I didn't demand
right,
that.
but I could go in so many directions. So you can see like how that would make women in certain denominations feel incredibly small. Their voices really don't matter. The fact that I'm just not in the mood is not a good enough reason, because I should never deny. Yeah. And I'm not blaming you. It's just the culture, that the church culture, and then, just laced with all the other things in there that really made that a big deal.
Yeah. Do you see the desert moving closer to organized religion today? So thinking about them, like if you could separate the chasm that exists in between them, because I think a lot of people, when they check out of church, they check out hard, and then there's a huge gap there before they find better communities to be a part of, or opening communities that they can be honest and be a part of, and still continue to wrestle with some of life's most important questions and biggest questions. So do you feel as though deserts, not necessarily yours, but just that concept, are they migrating closer to religious organizations, or are churches migrating closer to the desert, or is there still a massive chasm in between them? And the reason I ask that is, like, curious your relationship with past communities that have not come out with you, to where you're at now. But do you also then, just at a high level, do you see the two coming closer together, or still standing very rigidly apart?
Well, the organization as a whole is in decline. One of the reasons is it's really hard when you're inside of an organization to, number one, the best illustration I have is Rob Bell has an illustration of, it's called a fish standing on the beach. And so you get that picture of a fish standing on the beach. And he talks a lot about the water we swim in. And when you're in the water, you can't really see the water. The conditioning we've had, and then if we're inside the organization, it's really hard to change from the inside. We planted churches. That was our thing. We always thought we were planting something totally new, brand new. It's going to be different. And when we got it planted, it really wasn't that much different. And then over time, it would kind of morph back into whatever people that came influenced it to morph back to whatever they came from. And so it has a real hard time changing from the inside. So if it change, I just think the organized part of religion makes it so hard to be that authentic community. My statement I made not too long ago was, maybe instead of listening to sermons, we should have been listening to each other. And the so much of what Laura and I have been talking about today, kind of organically with you, keeps coming back to, we should have been having conversations. We should have been listening to each other. And we try to do that in small groups, but it's still part of the organization. The organization comes first. The organization takes priority. We spend 70% of the money on keeping the organization going. We spend all of our posture towards new members and so on. And it's really, really hard for it to change and morph from the inside. Maybe it needs to die, and I think something much simpler can be created. With Zoom and the internet and all of these things we have. I mean, right now we're having a good conversation. We're having good community, sitting in our homes, right? And I think great things can be built out of that type of thing. But it just, like we said before, the spirituality of all of this begins to be much simpler and much deeper, much simpler, more straightforward. And it has to do a lot with what we keep talking about, and that's listening to each other.
Yeah. Laura, anything to add, take away, change?
Yeah, I definitely think we need to be having those conversations with each other. I think there also needs to be some real, I don't know how you do it, but there needs to be some real healing. I think people that are out in the desert, so to speak, the wilderness, however you want to look at that, they're out there because they've experienced some real trauma inside of organized religion. And I think, if you were like, at first glance, when you ask me that, I'm like, no way, there's not going to be any, great bridge that's built between the two. But I do think that, I think there can be. I think we, like Karl said, we just have to be listening to each other. There's obviously going to be people in the desert that their heels are dug in. They don't want anything to do with religion or church organization ever again. There's also, people in the church that are like they have their heels dug in too. But in the same vein, there's also people on both sides, I think, that are speaking to each other. I think it's going to take some time, though. I mean, I really do think it's going to take some time. But one thing I know that we need to start doing is having conversation, but having really healthy conversation. Like, I know a lot of times, people come into our groups, kind of like what you were saying, Seth, but people will come into our group just to stir stuff up, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so, and that could be said on both sides of the camp.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be people. So I think until we're ready to like really just go, okay, let's not only have good conversation, but truly like listen to each other and not raise up these defense mechanisms, where we're just going to start attacking each other. It's going to be a slow process. I probably 2-3 years ago, I would have said, absolutely not. There's no way to bridge this, but it's going to be a slow process. I do think,
yeah.
Hopefully there can be a bridge built.
Yeah. Can you give me 20 seconds? I have a human being staring at me at the door. I'll be right back.
Okay. Dog too is like scratching everything.
Crisis averted.
Okay. Karl had to go to the bathroom.
Oh, that's fine. We can wait. So, Though I will warn you, I'm not going to learn how to edit video, and so this will just stay here. I'll edit the audio, but I don't care to learn how to edit video.
Oh, yeah.
So
I wouldn't know how to do that at all.
I'm sure I could figure it out, but
Karl does all. I do a podcast for education, and he does all the editing on that. But we don't use any video, so
yeah, I've gotten where I enjoy using the video as well. So it's fun to see people's faces. So, Karl, you have no idea. She was talking so bad about you while you were gone, like just so bad. No, I'm
what
just
happens when you leave?
Sorry.
Anyway, so my favorite question. Here we go. So y'all can answer in any particular order, but I'm looking forward to the answer. So when each of you try to wrap words around whatever it is that God is, the divine is, I don't really care what metaphor you want to use. What is that?
I should ask you probably how much time you have.
It's like crickets.
This
really-
says there's 3 hours and 56 minutes left on this memory card. So
Okay.
that's what you got.
So I've tried to eat healthy, and so one of the things I did was grow sprouts. And I don't know if you ever eaten sprouts, but they say I lost the word, cruciferous broccoli. A broccoli sprout has some nutrients in there like 50 times. They're really, really concentrated in sprouts. So I wanted to grow sprouts. Really, all you have to do to grow sprouts is put some seeds in water and they start growing. You just keep them wet, even kind of keep them in the dark for a few days, and then they start to become a little plant. They don't need soil at this point, but they'll grow to where you can eat those. They're really those nutrients are super concentrated. So kind of what we were talking about before, and kind of tying those two things together, that little tiny broccoli, alfalfa, the kind I use is called Broccoli and Friends. So it has broccoli and radishes and alfalfa and clover in it. And those inside that seed is everything it takes to make a broccoli plant. It's going to pull in some nutrients from the soil. It's going to do the thing with the sun, but all of the intellect to grow a broccoli plant is inside that tiny seed. And that just kind of blows our mind sometimes when we think about quantum physics and quantum mechanics and so on. We get down to the subatomic level, and even at the subatomic level, you see that knowledge and communication and things act different. Particles act differently based on who's watching them. Sometimes, there's some people call it the hum of the universe, and even from our biblical teaching, we learned that God is in everything. He's in all things and in all people. And so I tend to see God in that way. I see it as the hum of the universe, or the energy of the universe, and in everything, working in all things. That's comforting to me, because that means when we talk about connection, that I'm always connected. And things like organized religion, the Bible, traditions, all of those things, Brueggemann and Pete Enns and people like that talk about, like, the Bible as soil for where we're going. And all those things that we used to do, all those things that we used to, all those, the traditions we have can become soil, or in my case, compost for the future. They provide the nutrients for the future. And what we're growing into is something different. We're growing into something new, something different. We don't have to keep trying to recreate the past. And so my idea of God now is still evolving. And, I still say God. Laura says the divine. She can tell her own story, but, I think, like Keith Giles says now, he's quoting someone else, but anytime you can define God, you got it wrong. One of those sisters that I was talking about earlier said, she went up to the chalkboard one time, or the marker board, and wrote, "None of us is right." And then she just kind of stepped back and looked at us for a few minutes and kind of went on with her speech. But I think when we realize that however we try to define God or spirit or source, or however people have tried to define it for thousands and thousands of years, we just need to realize, first of all, that we really don't know. And we're guessing. And so the best I can do is have deep spiritual experiences, deep things. And as I'm evolving, as I'm changing, as I'm healing, like Laura mentioned, then I try to express that the best I can. The trouble, Seth, the trouble I have with everything is once we say, okay, I got it figured out, like, this is what it is, and we draw a line around it, then we stop growing, we stop learning, we stop discovering. We may be able to create a successful club or tribe, but we stop growing, we stop evolving, we stop becoming better, we stop healing. So that's the best I can do right now.
Yeah. Yeah. That works. That works. Laura, for you, same question.
Yeah, for me. So Karl had mentioned that, the word God just doesn't land well with me. And the reason for that, and I've through my healing journey, I realized that God is synonymous at this point in my life with my earthly father. And my earthly father, I'll spare everybody the long story, but basically just throughout my life and the lives of my sisters has just not been there, not been present. He hasn't spoken to us in, gosh, let's see, about 28 years. Not for lack of our trying, but for whatever reason, his own trauma, whatever, I won't speak for him. There hasn't been this relationship. And so, we always say Father, Father God. And so somewhere along the line, I kind of, melded these two things together: earthly father, heavenly father. And I'm just like, if this is what a father is, that's really of no use to me. So yeah. So, for me, it's just about experiencing just life in a spiritual way. And like Karl said, just kind of always being open to whatever, the divine, whatever the universe has to speak to me. And that sounds very woo woo, but I go back to when our first granddaughter was born. I held her for the first time, and I would say in that moment, that's when I first truly experienced the love of the divine. And so from there, instead of thinking that the only way I can experience God or the divine is in a building, if I have a certain book open, if I'm around certain people, is to realize that is always around me. And like you said, what I choose to call it, I don't know that really matters as much as just that that experience of knowing love and compassion for other people. Those are the things that are most important to me. And if that's God for somebody, great. For me, it's not, just because of that, that connection I have there. Mm-hmm. But it definitely is something spiritual. And so I choose to call it divine. I feel like Karl, it's going to always be evolving. I don't feel like there's going to be a stopping point to that. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I am as well. I like like what I really like what you both have said. I want to leave the listener with something further. So if you want, so you said something about quantum physics. I think you said that, Karl, or maybe you didn't use
Mhm.
quantum, maybe you use qualitative. Either way, they're different words. That is something that, so when I think about God, whatever word you want to use there, I find it amazing that whatever God is, it exists like faster than the speed of light, and the universe is expanding also faster than the speed of light, and that doesn't make any sense. But somehow it's existing faster or bigger, or there's not a good word for the word that it needs to be. But that there's a principle. If people wanted to stop right now, hit pause, do your Googles, and just type in the double hyphen slit experiment that the Weizmann with a Z, Weizmann Institute did, where basically like our observing things happening affects what happens,
Mhm.
which really sits well with my brain. But when I think about if we bear an image of God and God creates, and so we create, when we see things being created, and
Yeah.
then we can say if it's good or bad based
Right.
on the actions of that, which also just evokes Genesis to me. Anyway, I'm way off topic, but for some reason when you said that, Karl, I could not stop. Like there's the
Yeah.
Heisenberg uncertainty, or uncertainty principle. No, Schrodinger's uncertainty principle. There's all kinds of things there. Anyway, not why you're here. I'm off on a tangent, but I can't help myself. So this would be the part where you get to plug the pluggables wherever you want to plug the things that you want people to go do after they're done listening. They set the phone down or their Sonos speaker down or their Alexa down or however they happen to be listening to this. Please, good. There used to be an Alexa over there, and when I would say that word, it would. She's not in the episode this week. The kids have moved her somewhere else. So, yeah. So where would you want people to go as we end our time together?
Yeah, we used to say go to the website, but I destroyed the website. So I'm in the
So don't go to the
process of rebuilding it.
website.
Everything we do is called the Desert Sanctuary. So you can go to that specific site, or on any of your podcast players, you get the Desert Sanctuary.
Mhm.
We're on pathos.com for the blog called The Desert Sanctuary. And we have a Facebook group. We have a Twitter. I don't know if that really matters in the future or not. But Karl's with the K, forehands like in tennis, and Laura's just like it sounds.
Yep.
Yeah, the book is called Out into the Desert, Thriving Outside of Organized Religion. And it was released in August. Yeah, August. Um, it did pretty well, and it was on, new releases bestseller. And then at some point in October, we marked down to 99 cents. That helped it even more, and it stayed up on the actual bestseller in our category for a month or two. And it's still in the top 50s. So it's doing well. People are relating to it. They're saying that resonates with me, that it helps put some language to my journey. We tried, as much as we've, maybe, I don't know, been negative about religion today. We try to say in the book, if that's working for you, you need to stay in it. We're
Yeah.
not trying to convince anybody, but also we want you to be honest with yourself, and do an honest evaluation. Maybe take some time off and step back, like the fish standing next to the ocean, get some perspective, get out of the water you're swimming in for a little while, and do that evaluation for real. So we invite people to the book. We're working on like Laura said, another project that kind of follows up on this.
Yeah.
And that might be available next year. Just kind of keep your eyes peeled.
Keep
Yeah.
your eyes
Right.
peeled.
I was
Sure.
going to make you answer that question, but you don't have to then. So you're not going to, you teased at the beginning, you teased in the first third, the second third, and now at the end. You're not going to say what this project is. That's not going to happen.
Well, you ask about, how do we define God and things like that. It's Laura and I are writing it together, and it's harder this time.
Well, it's harder for me. I don't know if it's harder for you, but
Yeah.
it's definitely harder for me.
But it may be because of the sub. So the title is called Of God.
Mm.
That's about all I can tell you right now because it's not done.
That
And
sounds
who
fair to
knows
me.
what's going to happen. So
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds fair to me. Well, good. I appreciate you both being on this morning. I think it's still morning. It is still morning for everybody. So,
it's our pleasure.
and yeah, definitely. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
All right, let me stop that recording and then